The Georgia courtroom crackled with tension, a powder keg waiting to ignite. Angela Carter stood at the witness stand, her dark eyes blazing like embers in the dim light. Her navy blazer was crisp, her braided hair tight, but it was her voice that stopped hearts. "Officer Evans, you thought you could bury the truth, but the truth is a fire that never goes out." Gasps erupted, reporters' pens flew. The jury froze, their skeptical gazes shifted to Mark Evans, the white cop whose smug smirk vanished. His uniform gleamed, but his hands twitched, betraying unease. The prosecutor, a slick suit with a sharper tongue, opened his mouth to object, but the judge, a grizzled man with weary eyes, silenced him with a raised hand. The room belonged to Angela now. "You picked the wrong woman to lie about," she said, her words a spark in dry grass. "Today, that fire burns bright." Whispers exploded, a roar of shock and intrigue. The judge banged his gavel, but the electric hum of anticipation drowned it out. Activists in the back clutched signs, "Justice now," their faces alight with hope. Mark stared at the table, his confidence crumbling like ash. Who was this woman, speaking with a warrior's weight? What secret could turn a small-town trial into a reckoning? Minutes earlier, Mark had painted Angela as a violent thug who attacked him during a traffic stop. His testimony was smooth, practiced, backed by fellow officers' nods. The jury seemed to buy it. Why doubt a cop over a black woman from the rough side of town? But Angela's words had flipped the script, her calm fury a flame that threatened to consume his lies. She sat, her posture unyielding, eyes locked on Mark. The prosecutor scrambled, but the room's pulse beat with Angela's rhythm. Outside, the Georgia sun sank, casting an orange glow over the courthouse steps, as if her fire was already spreading. On X, a clip of her testimony, those fierce words, that blazing stare, went viral. #Truth is a fire trending within minutes. Reporters typed furiously, sensing a story that could set the nation ablaze. Angela's presence lingered like smoke, her promise of justice hanging heavy. But what fire could silence a room of doubters, and what truth was she ready to unleash? The courtroom was a pressure cooker, its high ceilings and dusty windows trapping the heat of a Georgia summer. Spectators packed the benches, locals curious about the trial, reporters sniffing a scoop, activists whispering about change. Angela Carter, a black woman in her late 30s, had been an enigma until she spoke. Her modest clothes hid a strength that now filled the room, her voice a beacon in the haze of lies. Mark Evans, a 10-year veteran of the force, had built his case on quicksand. He claimed Angela lunged at him during a routine stop, her fists flying, her hands grasping for his gun. His fellow officers backed him, their testimonies vague but loyal. The prosecutor leaned into stereotypes, painting Angela as an angry, uncontrollable threat. The jury, a mix of small-town faces, nodded along, their biases stirred. But Angela's words had changed everything. "The truth is a fire that never goes out." The phrase echoed in the gallery, scribbled in notebooks, tweeted by activists. It was more than a statement, it was a battle cry, a spark that could ignite a movement. Her second line, "You picked the wrong woman to lie about," landed like a punch, its defiance raw and unapologetic. The judge, Henry Grayson, had seen countless trials, but something about Angela's resolve made him pause. His gavel struck, demanding order, but his eyes lingered on her, curious, almost respectful. The prosecutor, Richard Avery, tried to regain control, his voice sharp but shaken. "Your Honor, this is theatrics, not testimony," he snapped. But the objection felt hollow. The room was no longer his to command. Mark's face told a different story. His jaw clenched, his fingers dug into the table's edge, his earlier swagger gone. He avoided Angela's gaze, staring at his polished shoes, as if the floor could swallow his lies. His fellow officers, seated in the back, exchanged uneasy glances, their silent support wavering. Outside, the crowd grew. Activists chanted softly, their voices carrying the melody of "Lift Every Voice and Sing," a song of Black resilience. News vans lined the street, cameras rolling, reporters live tweeting the trial's twist. The clip of Angela's testimony spread like wildfire, racking up thousands of views. #TruthIsAFire became a rallying cry, quoted by influencers, shared by organizers, a symbol of defiance against injustice. Angela sat, her hands folded, her face a mask of calm. But her eyes burned, a fire that promised more than words. The truth, she'd said, would burn bright. And as the courtroom buzzed, that fire was already catching, ready to blaze through the lies that had held her down. What secret did Angela Carter hold, a woman who could turn a cop's lies into ashes? And how would her fire reshape a town, a trial, a nation? The rain fell in sheets over the small Georgia town, turning the streets into rivers of mud and memory. Angela Carter drove her old pickup truck through the downpour, the wipers struggling to keep up. Her radio played low, the soulful notes of "Lift Every Voice and Sing" filling the cab, a song her mother, Grace, had taught her as a child, a reminder of the fire that burned in their ancestors' hearts. At 38, Angela lived quietly, running a community center called Freedom's Flame, where she taught Black kids about their history. Harriet Tubman, the North Star, the unquenchable fight for freedom. She kept her past as a Marine raider buried, a secret tucked away like the dog tags under her shirt. The town of Willow Creek was a place where time moved slow, but tensions ran deep. Old plantation houses loomed on the outskirts, their shadows a constant reminder of a past that never quite let go. Racial divides simmered beneath polite smiles, and the police, led by Chief Harold Tate, kept a tight grip on the status quo. Angela knew this too well. She'd seen it in the way folks crossed the street when she walked by, in the whispers that followed her at the grocery store. But she carried on, fueled by Grace's words. "You're the fire of our ancestors, Angela. No one can put that out." Tonight, she was headed home from the center, where she'd spent hours with kids like Jamal, a lanky 15-year-old with a quick smile and a knack for survival skills. The road was dark, the rain relentless. Then blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror. Angela's stomach tightened, but her hands stayed steady on the wheel. She pulled over, the gravel crunching under her tires, and took a deep breath. "Stay calm," she told herself, echoing the discipline of her Marine days. Officer Mark Evans stepped out of his patrol car, his silhouette sharp against the rain. His flashlight beam cut through the dark, blinding her as he approached. "License and registration," he barked, his tone more command than request. Angela complied, her movements slow and deliberate, but her eyes caught the edge in his voice, the way his hand rested on his holster. "What's the problem, officer?" she asked, her voice even, her training kicking in. Assess, de-escalate, survive. "You ran a red light," Mark snapped, though the intersection behind them had no traffic light, only a stop sign. His eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a sneer. "People like you think you can do whatever you want." Angela's jaw tightened, but she kept her cool. "I didn't run anything. Can you clarify the violation?"
Mark's face hardened. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his voice laced with contempt. "Now." She hesitated, her mind flashing to a mission in Yemen where she'd led her team through a hail of bullets to rescue hostages. She'd faced death without flinching, but this, here, in her own town, felt like a different kind of ambush. "I'm not resisting," she said, stepping out into the rain, her hands raised. "But I'd like to know why."
Mark grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. "You don't get to ask questions," he hissed, shoving her against the truck. "People like you need to learn your place." His words stung, but Angela's training held her steady. She didn't fight back, didn't give him the reaction he wanted. Instead, she locked eyes with him, her gaze a quiet fire that made him flinch. Minutes later, she was cuffed, the cold metal biting her wrists. Mark's radio crackled as he called for backup, claiming she'd assaulted him. The lie was bold, but Angela knew the game. She'd seen it before, on the streets, in the military, in the stories Grace told of their ancestors' fight. As he shoved her into the patrol car, the rain soaked her clothes, but her resolve burned hotter than ever. At the station, Angela sat in a holding cell, the fluorescent lights harsh against her skin. She thought of her mother, Grace, a community organizer who'd marched in the 60s, her voice echoing, "The fire of our ancestors always lights the way." She thought of David Reed, her old Marine buddy turned lawyer, who'd promised to fight for her. David had a scar across his cheek from a mission they'd survived together, a reminder of the battles they'd faced. She'd called him from the station, her voice calm but firm. "David, they're trying to put out my fire. Don't let them." David arrived, his suit rumpled but his eyes fierce. "We'll fight this, Angela," he said, gripping his briefcase like a weapon. "But you've got to tell me everything. What's the play?" She leaned forward, her voice low. "The play is the truth, and the truth is a fire they can't control." Outside, the rain slowed, but the town buzzed. Word of Angela's arrest spread, whispered in barbershops and church pews. Jamal, who'd seen the flashing lights from his bedroom window, clutched his phone, a shaky video of the incident saved in his gallery. He didn't know it yet, but that video would be a spark. On X, posts about Angela began to surface, a murmur of outrage growing. Hashtag truth is a fire flickered, not yet ablaze, but ready to catch. Angela sat back, her hands clasped, her dog tags cool against her chest. She was no stranger to battles, but this one was personal. The fire of her ancestors burned in her veins, and she'd make sure it lit up the darkness of Willow Creek. What would it take to fan that fire into a blaze that could burn through a town's lies? And who was Angela Carter, really, to carry such a flame? The Willow Creek Courthouse stood like a scar on the Georgia landscape, its stone walls heavy with the weight of old injustices. Inside, the air was electric, thick with tension that clung like damp heat. Angela Carter sat at the defense table, her navy blazer sharp, her hands folded, her eyes smoldering with a quiet fire. Beside her, David Reed, her lawyer and former Marine comrade, flipped through notes, the scar on his cheek catching the light as he whispered tactics. The gallery buzzed, locals muttering, reporters scribbling, activists clutching signs that read, "Justice for Angela." But the jury's skeptical glares pressed down, a storm ready to douse her flame. Officer Mark Evans took the stand, his uniform crisp, his voice slick as oil. "She came at me," he said, his tone polished to a sheen. "Fists swinging, reaching for my gun. I had no choice but to restrain her." His fellow officers, lined up in the back, nodded like clockwork, their faces a wall of allegiance. The prosecutor, Richard Avery, leaned forward, his tailored suit gleaming, his smile a razor. "So, Officer Evans, you felt threatened?" he asked, steering the story with ease. "Absolutely," Mark replied, his eyes darting to the jury, selling his lie. "She was aggressive, uncooperative, a danger to public safety."
The jury shifted, some nodding, others jotting notes. Avery's words painted Angela as a stereotype, an angry black woman, a threat to Willow Creek's fragile order. The gallery murmured, a mix of agreement and unease. Outside, a crowd of black residents gathered on the courthouse steps, their voices rising in "Lift Every Voice and Sing," the anthem of resilience echoing through the walls. Angela caught the melody, her mother Grace's voice in her mind. "You're the fire of our ancestors, Angela. No one can put that out." David leaned close, his voice tight. "They're buying his story," he whispered, his fingers tapping nervously. "We need something solid, or this jury's gonna bury us." Angela's gaze held steady. "Let them believe the lie for now," she said softly, her voice calm as a still flame. "The truth burns hotter than they expect." The prosecutor called another officer, who echoed Mark's tale, claiming Angela lunged and resisted. The testimony was flimsy, rehearsed, but it landed like a punch. David scratched notes, his frustration mounting. He'd fought beside Angela in war zones, seen her keep her cool under fire, but this courtroom was a different beast. Mark's badge carried more weight than Angela's truth, and the system was built to protect him. "Your Honor," Avery said, turning to Judge Henry Grayson, "the defendant's actions show a blatant disregard for the law. She's no victim, she's a menace." Angela's jaw tightened, but her face stayed composed, a mask of resolve. She thought of her Marine Raider days, leading missions through chaos, where one wrong move meant death. She'd faced enemies with bullets, not lies. But Willow Creek's history, plantation shadows, whispered slurs, a system that saw her as less, felt just as lethal.
The jury's eyes bored into her, some with pity, others with judgment, their biases a barrier she'd have to burn through. David stood, his voice firm but strained. "Your Honor, the defense will prove Officer Evans's account is fabricated. We request time to present evidence that contradicts his claims." Avery smirked, his voice dripping scorn. "What evidence? Her word against a decorated officer?" A few jurors chuckled, and the gallery stirred. Judge Grayson's gavel cracked, silencing the room. "Enough," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Mr. Reed, you'd better have something worth my time." Angela leaned toward David, her voice a whisper. "Stay steady, brother. The fire will light the way." She echoed Grace's words, the ones that had guided her through deserts and danger. David nodded, though his hands shook as he sat. He knew Angela's strength, but the courtroom was a trap, and they were outmatched. The prosecution rested, and the room grew heavier, doubt hanging like smoke. Mark stepped down, his smirk creeping back, a predator sure of his kill. His fellow officers slapped his shoulder, their laughter a low rumble. But Angela caught the flicker in his eyes, a hint of unease, like a man who'd sparked a fire he couldn't control. Outside, the crowd swelled, their rendition of "Lift Every Voice and Sing" growing bolder, a chant of defiance. Grace stood among them, her gray hair tied back, her eyes fierce with pride. She'd raised Angela on stories of Harriet Tubman, of ancestors who carried fire in their hearts against impossible odds. That fire now burned in her daughter, ready to blaze through the lies that chained her. Angela's thoughts turned to Jamal, the kid from her Freedom's Flame Center who'd seen the patrol lights that night. His text from the station echoed, "I got something, Miss Angela. Hold on." She didn't know what he meant, but she felt it, a spark waiting to catch. Jamal was young, but he carried the same fire she did, the flame of their people, unyielding. On X, the anger was rising. Posts about Angela's trial spread, tagged with #TruthIsAFire. A local pastor tweeted, "They tried to snuff her light, but Angela Carter's flame will wake this town." The hashtag was catching, an ember in the digital wind, poised to flare. Angela sat, her hands clasped, her dog tags cool against her skin. The jury might doubt her now, but she'd faced worse.
The truth was her weapon, forged in battles far from Willow Creek, and she'd wield it until Mark's lies turned to ash. Her fire was only beginning to burn, and no courtroom could contain it.
The Willow Creek courthouse was a pressure cooker, its walls vibrating with the heat of a trial that had split the town in two. Angela Carter sat at the defense table, her navy blazer a quiet armor, her eyes burning with the steady fire of resolve. David Reed, her lawyer and Marine comrade, paced beside her, his scar taut as he whispered, "We're running out of time." The gallery was a sea of restless faces, locals divided, reporters hungry for a headline, activists waving signs that read, "Free Angela." Outside, the crowd's rendition of "Lift Every Voice and Sing," a pulse of defiance that seeped through the stone. The prosecution had built a fortress of lies, claiming Angela attacked Officer Mark Evans during a traffic stop. Mark's testimony, backed by his fellow officers, had swayed the jury, their skeptical glances like embers threatening to snuff out Angela's truth. David had pushed back, but their evidence was thin. A few inconsistencies in Mark's story, nothing solid enough to crack his badge-protected narrative. The judge, Henry Grayson, grew impatient, his gavel a ticking clock. David leaned toward Angela, his voice low. "The body cam footage from Mark's car is missing. Convenient, right? We need a miracle." Angela's face stayed calm, her voice a whisper of steel. "Miracles don't come, David. Fire does. Keep digging." That night, in a cramped office above the Freedom's Flame Community Center, David and Angela pored over case files, the rain drumming against the windows like a war beat. Angela's mother, Grace, brought coffee, her gray hair tied back, her eyes fierce with faith. "The ancestors are with you," she said, echoing her lifelong mantra, "The fire always finds a way." Then a knock at the door. Jamal, the 15-year-old from Angela's center, stood there, his hoodie soaked, his eyes wide with nervous determination. "Miss Angela," he said, clutching his phone, "I saw it all that night, from my window." He hesitated, then held out the device. "I recorded it." David grabbed the phone, his hands shaking as he played the video. The footage was grainy, shot through rain-streaked glass, but it was damning. Mark's patrol car loomed in the frame, his flashlight blinding Angela as she stood with hands raised. His voice cut through the storm. "People like you don't belong here." Then his arm lashed out, shoving Angela against her truck, her body stumbling but unyielding. No fists from her, no lunge, just a woman standing her ground against a bully with a badge. Angela's breath caught, not from fear, but from the spark she felt. "That's it," she said, her voice low. "That's the fire we need." David's eyes lit up, but his jaw tightened. "It's shaky, low res. Avery'll tear it apart in court. And Jamal?" He glanced at the kid, who shifted nervously. "They'll come for him if we use this." Jamal squared his shoulders, his voice cracking but firm. "I ain't scared, Miss Angela. You taught me to carry the flame, right?" Angela's heart swelled, but her mind flashed to the risks. Mark's allies, the police chief's influence, the town's wrath. She'd faced death in Yemen, led her team through fire, but protecting Jamal felt heavier. She nodded, her hand on his shoulder. "You're braver than most, Jamal, but we do this smart." Back in court, David moved to introduce the video, his voice steady but urgent. "Your Honor, we have new evidence, a civilian recording that contradicts Officer Evans's account." Avery shot up, his face a mask of outrage. "This is a stunt, a blurry video from some kid? It's inadmissible." The gallery erupted, whispers turning to shouts. Judge Grayson's gavel slammed, his voice sharp. "I'll review it in chambers." Courts recessed. Mark's smirk faltered as he watched the exchange, his fingers twitching. His fellow officers leaned forward, their faces tight. The prosecution's wall was cracking, but not broken. Avery stormed out, already plotting to discredit Jamal, to spin the video as a fake. Angela caught Mark's glance, a flicker of fear, like a man who'd lit a match in a dry field. Outside, the crowd roared. "Lift every voice and sing, now a battle cry." Grace stood at the forefront, her sign high. "Truth is a fire." The activists chanted Angela's name, their voices a spark that spread to X, where hashtag Truth is a Fire trended higher, fueled by clips of the crowd and Jamal's courage. A local organizer tweeted, "A kid with a phone just lit a fuse in Willow Creek. Angela's flame won't be stopped." But the town was splitting. Some residents rallied behind Angela, calling her a modern Harriet Tubman. Others backed Mark, insisting cops don't lie. At the Freedom's Flame Center, graffiti appeared overnight, "Go home." Angela saw it, her jaw tight, but her fire burned brighter. She thought of her Marine days when she'd carried wounded comrades through chaos. This was no different. Jamal, Grace, her community were her team now. David met Angela in the courthouse hallway, his face grim. Avery's digging into Jamal's family, looking for dirt. And the video's quality might not hold up. We're close, but not there. Angela's eyes met his, her voice unwavering. "We don't need perfect, David. We need truth. The fire's already burning. Let it spread." Jamal stood nearby, his hoodie pulled tight, his eyes fierce despite the weight on his shoulders. Angela saw herself in him, the same fire, the same fight. She'd taught him to survive, to carry the flame of their ancestors. Now he was lighting the way for her. The trial was far from over, but the spark Jamal had brought was catching, a flame that no lie could smother. Angela's truth was rising, and Willow Creek would feel its heat.
The Willow Creek courthouse was a furnace, its air thick with the heat of a trial that had set the town ablaze. Angela Carter stepped onto the witness stand, her navy blazer a shield, her braided hair tight, her eyes a fire that refused to flicker. The gallery was a restless sea, locals whispering, reporters poised with pens, activists gripping signs that read, "Truth is a fire." Outside, the crowd's rendition of "Lift Every Voice and Sing" roared like a battle hymn, its melody seeping through the walls. The jury, once swayed by Officer Mark Evans's lies, now leaned forward, their skeptical glances softening, sensing a shift. The prosecution had built a wall of deceit, claiming Angela attacked Mark during a traffic stop. Their case leaned on his badge and rehearsed testimonies, but cracks had formed. David Reed, Angela's lawyer and Marine comrade, had introduced Jamal's shaky video, showing Mark shoving Angela with no provocation, his voice sneering, "People like you don't belong here." The prosecutor, Richard Avery, had dismissed it as unreliable, but the jury's murmurs suggested doubt. Judge Henry Grayson, his gavel still, watched Angela with a mix of curiosity and caution. David stood, his scar taut, his voice steady. "Ms. Carter, tell the court who you are." Angela leaned into the microphone, her voice low but resonant, cutting through the room like a blade. "I'm Angela Carter, born and raised in Willow Creek. I run the Freedom's Flame Community Center, teaching kids to carry the fire of their ancestors, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, those who fought for freedom." She paused, her eyes locking onto Mark, who shifted in his seat, his smirk gone. "But there's something else you need to know." The room held its breath. Reporters froze, pens hovering. The activists in the back leaned forward, their signs trembling in their hands. "For 8 years, I served as a Marine raider," Angela said. "I led special operations in Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan. I faced enemies under fire, saved lives, and never lost my cool. You think I'd lose it over a traffic stop?" Her voice rose, steady but fierce. "I've stared down death, but the real enemy is the lie sitting in this courtroom, wearing a badge."
Gasps erupted. The jury's eyes widened, some exchanging stunned glances. Mark's face drained of color, his hands gripping the table's edge. His fellow officers seated behind him shifted uncomfortably, their loyalty wavering. Avery opened his mouth to object, but no words came. Judge Grayson leaned forward, his gavel forgotten, his eyes fixed on Angela. "I learned to control fear in war," she continued. "I trained to de-escalate, to protect, to stand firm. Officer Evans claims I attacked him, but I know pressure and I know lies. His story is a spark that won't catch, because the truth is a fire that burns through everything." She paused, her eyes sweeping the jury. "I fight for my community, for kids like Jamal, for the ancestors who carried this flame. And I'm fighting now, because lies don't scare me, they fuel me."
The courtroom exploded into whispers, a roar of shock and awe. Reporters scribbled furiously, their headlines already forming. Activists stood, their signs raised high, chanting, "Truth, truth," until Grayson's gavel cracked, demanding order. But the room was Angela's now, her presence ablaze that no one could ignore. David seized the moment, his voice sharp. "Your Honor, Miss Carter's training and character disprove the prosecution's claims. We move to present the civilian video again, which aligns with her account." Avery leapt up, his face red. "This is irrelevant. She's a former soldier, not a saint. Her past doesn't change her actions." But his voice faltered, the jury's eyes no longer his. Grayson's gavel struck again. "I'll allow the video to be shown," he said, his tone firm. "Proceed." The grainy footage played on a courtroom screen, Mark's shove clear despite the rain-blurred lens. The jury watched, some leaning forward, others shaking their heads. Angela's words echoed in their minds, her Marine Raider past, her unshakable calm, her fire. Mark stared at the floor, his earlier confidence ash. Outside, the crowd surged, news of Angela's revelation spreading like wildfire. "Lift every voice and sing" grew louder, a chant of triumph. Grace, standing among the activists, held her sign, "Truth is a fire," her eyes wet with pride. She'd raised Angela on stories of ancestors who defied chains, and now her daughter defied lies. On X, hashtag Truth is a Fire exploded, joined by hashtag Fire of Truth as Angela's words went viral. A clip of her testimony, "The real enemy is the lie wearing a badge," racked up thousands of views, retweeted by organizers, quoted by influencers. A local activist posted, "Angela Carter just turned Willow Creek's lies to dust, her fire's unstoppable." The digital blaze was growing, fueled by a town awakening. Angela sat, her posture unyielding, her dog tags cool against her skin. The jury's eyes were different now, less doubt, more respect. Mark's lies were crumbling, but the fight wasn't over. Avery would push back, and the system would protect its own. Yet Angela's fire was spreading, from Jamal's spark to the crowd's song, from her ancestors' flame to the truth she carried. The courtroom was no longer a cage, it was a forge, and Angela's truth was being tempered, ready to burn through Willow Creek's shadows. The Willow Creek Courthouse was a forge, its air crackling with the heat of a trial that had set the town ablaze. Angela Carter sat at the defense table, her navy blazer a quiet armor, her eyes burning with an unyielding fire. Beside her, David Reed, her lawyer and former Marine comrade, gripped a stack of documents, his scar taut as his gaze burned with resolve. The gallery was packed, locals whispering, reporters scribbling, activists hoisting signs that read, "Truth is a fire." Outside, the crowd's rendition of Lift Every Voice and Sing roared like a wildfire, its melody seeping through the stone walls, fueling a fight for justice. The prosecution had built a fortress of lies, claiming Angela attacked Officer Mark Evans during a traffic stop, but cracks had formed. Jamal's shaky video, showing Mark shoving Angela with no provocation, his voice sneering, "People like you don't belong here," had shaken the jury. Angela's revelation as a former Marine raider had shifted their skeptical glances to awe. The prosecutor, Richard Avery, clung to his narrative, dismissing the video as unreliable, but his voice wavered, like a man facing a blaze he couldn't douse. David stood, his voice sharp as a blade. "Your Honor, the defense has new evidence, a restored body cam video from Officer Evans's patrol car, recovered by an independent cybersecurity expert." The room froze. Mark's face drained, his hands clutching the table's edge, his eyes wild like a man watching fire catch dry grass. Avery shot up, his voice shrill. "Preposterous! That footage was corrupted. This is a fabrication." But Judge Henry Grayson raised a hand, his eyes narrow. "Silence," he snapped. "Play the video." The courtroom screen flickered, the footage clearer than Jamal's phone video. Under the rain, Angela stood by her truck, hands raised, her voice calm. "What's the violation, officer?" Mark, his face twisted with contempt, growled, "You know who you are." Then he shoved her against the truck, the force making her stumble but not fall. No fists, no lunge, just a woman standing her ground against a bully with a badge. The gallery erupted in whispers, the jury leaning forward, some shaking their heads in shock. David turned to Mark, his voice like flame. "Officer Evans, is this the attack you described, or did you lie to cover your own actions?" Mark stammered, his eyes darting, sweat beading on his brow. His fellow officers, seated behind, exchanged uneasy glances, their ranks wavering. Angela sat, her face composed, but her heart blazed. She remembered Yemen, carrying wounded comrades through gunfire, leaving no one behind. Now she fought for Jamal, Grace, her community, her team in this war. She glanced at Jamal in the back row, clutching his mother's hand, his eyes bright despite the weight on his shoulders. He'd lit the spark, now she'd turn it into a blaze. Avery tried to salvage his case, his voice trembling. This video, it could be tampered with. The defendant was still uncooperative. But the jury wasn't listening. Their eyes were on Angela, the woman who'd led special ops through war zones, now standing firm against lies. Grayson's gavel slammed, demanding order, but the room belonged to Angela, her fire spreading through every heart. Outside, the crowd cheered as news of the video spread. "Lift Every Voice and Sing" thundered, Grace at the forefront, her sign, "Truth is a Fire," held high, her eyes wet with pride. She'd raised Angela on stories of Harriet Tubman, of ancestors who carried the flame of freedom. Now, that flame was torching Willow Creek's lies. On X, #TruthIsAFire and #FireOfTruth exploded. The body cam clip, Mark's shove, his venomous words, racked up thousands of views, spreading from Willow Creek to the nation. An activist tweeted, "Angela Carter just burned down a cop's lies. Her fire is justice." The digital blaze grew, awakening those who doubted. But the fight wasn't over. Avery, face flushed, whispered to his team, plotting a counterattack. Mark, eyes hollow, knew his story was crumbling, but the system, Chief Harold Tate, his allies, wouldn't abandon him. Angela felt the pressure, but Grace's words echoed. "The fire of our ancestors always lights the way." She'd faced death before. Lies were just kindling to her flame.
David sat beside her, whispering, "We hit hard, but Avery'll attack the video's authenticity or target Jamal. We need to be ready." Angela nodded, her eyes on the jury. "They've seen the fire, David. Now let it burn." Jamal from the gallery met Angela's gaze, his eyes a small flame she'd kindled in him. She'd taught him to carry their ancestors' fire, and now he was part of this blaze. The crowd outside, singing strong, was fuel. Angela wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone the system had tried to snuff out. The courtroom was no longer a trap. It was a crucible where Angela's truth was forged, burning through Willow Creek's shadows. Her fire from Jamal, Grace, and their ancestors was spreading, and no lie could contain it.
The Willow Creek courthouse was a battlefield, its air thick with the smoke of a trial that had ignited a town. Angela Carter sat at the defense table, her navy blazer a shield, her eyes a relentless fire that burned through doubt. David Reed, her lawyer and Marine comrade, stood beside her, his scar tight, his hand steady despite the storm brewing. The gallery was a cauldron, locals divided, reporters typing furiously, activists clutching signs that read, "Truth is a fire." Outside, the crowd's rendition of "Lift Every Voice and Sing" thundered, a war cry echoing through the stone walls, binding a community unbroken. The prosecution's lies were crumbling. Jamal's phone video and the restored body cam footage had exposed Officer Mark Evans shoving Angela, his voice dripping venom. "People like you don't belong here." Angela's Marine Raider cast had turned the jury's skepticism into respect, their eyes now tracking her every move. But the system wasn't done fighting. Richard Avery, the prosecutor, paced like a cornered animal, his tailored suit rumpled, his face a mask of desperation. Mark sat at the plaintiff's table, his uniform no longer a badge of honor, his gaze hollow as his allies wavered. Avery stood, his voice sharp but unsteady. "Your Honor, the defense's so-called evidence is tainted. The body cam footage shows signs of tampering. Our expert will testify to pixel inconsistencies." He gestured to a bespectacled tech analyst who nodded nervously. "And the civilian video, shot by a juvenile with a history of truancy, hardly credible." The gallery gasped, whispers turning to murmurs. Jamal, seated with his mother in the back, shrank in his seat, his eyes wide but defiant. David leapt up, his voice a blade. "Objection! The prosecution's expert is a hired gun with no independent verification, and attacking a minor witness is beneath this court." Judge Henry Grayson's gavel cracked, his eyes weary but sharp. "Sustained," he said, glaring at Avery. "But I'll hear the expert. Proceed." The analyst took the stand, spouting jargon about digital artifacts and frame manipulation. His testimony was thin, more smoke than substance, but it planted seeds of confusion. Avery smirked, sensing a lifeline. He turned to the jury, his voice oily. "This case hinges on trust. Do you trust a decorated officer or a woman with a chip on her shoulder and a kid with a shaky phone?" Angela's jaw tightened, but her fire didn't waver. She thought of Yemen, where she'd led her team through ambushes, reading lies in the enemy's eyes. Avery's tactics were no different, smoke to choke the truth. She leaned toward David, whispering, "They're scared. Keep pushing." David called a rebuttal witness, a cybersecurity expert from Atlanta, a black woman with a no-nonsense demeanor. "The body cam footage is clean," she said, her voice cutting through Avery's haze. "No tampering. The metadata matches the patrol car system." She displayed charts, her evidence airtight. But Avery interrupted, peppering her with questions to muddy the waters. The jury's eyes glazed, overwhelmed by technicalities. Then, a new blow. Avery produced a school record, waving it like a weapon. Jamal Carter, no relation to the defendant, has a history of skipping class and minor vandalism.
Why trust his video? Jamal's mother gripped his hand, her face a mix of anger and fear. The gallery stirred, some locals nodding, others glaring at Avery's low blow. David's face reddened, but Angela touched his arm, her voice low. "Let them throw dirt, David. Fire burns through it all." She echoed Grace's words, the ones that had carried her through war. She glanced at Jamal, mouthing, "You're strong." His chin lifted, a small flame flickering in his eyes. Outside, the crowd grew restless, news of Avery's attack spreading. "Lift every voice and sing," surged, Grace at the forefront, her sign, "Truth is a fire, a beacon." She'd taught Angela about Harriet Tubman, about ancestors who faced whips and chains but never broke. Now, Angela faced lies, and her community stood with her, their fire unyielding. David rallied, calling Jamal to the stand. The boy walked forward, his hoodie loose, his step steady despite the weight of every eye. "I saw Miss Angela get pushed," he said, his voice cracking but clear. "I filmed it because she taught me to stand up. She's like family." His words landed like sparks, the jury softening, some nodding. Avery cross-examined, his questions sharp, but Jamal held firm, his fire a mirror of Angela's. The room shifted. The jury's doubt faded, their eyes returning to Angela, the woman who'd led missions through chaos, now leading a town through lies. Mark's face was ashen, his hands trembling. His fellow officers avoided his gaze, their loyalty fracturing. Avery's voice grew frantic, his arguments unraveling. On X, #TruthIsAFire and #FireOfTruth blazed brighter. Clips of Jamal's testimony, "She taught me to stand up," went viral, shared by activists and influencers. A pastor tweeted, "A boy's courage and a woman's fire are burning Willow Creek's lies to ash." The digital flames spread, uniting voices beyond the town. Angela sat, her hands clasped, her dog tags cool against her skin. The system's counterattack had stung, but her fire burned hotter. Grace's words echoed, "The fire of our ancestors always lights the way." She'd fought in deserts and now in courtrooms, for Jamal, for her people, for truth. The jury saw it now, the flame she carried, the one no lie could extinguish. The courtroom was a crucible, and Angela's truth was molten, reshaping Willow Creek's shadows. Her fire, fueled by Jamal, Grace, and their ancestors, was a blaze that no system could contain.
The Willow Creek Courthouse was a crucible, its walls pulsing with the heat of a town's lies. Angela Carter sat at the defense table, her navy blazer crisp, her eyes a steady flame that no storm could extinguish. David Reed, her lawyer and Marine comrade, stood beside her, his scar taut, his hands clenched as the jury filed back in. The gallery was a tinderbox, locals hushed, reporters poised, activists gripping signs that read, "Truth is a fire." Outside, the crowd's rendition of "Lift Every Voice and Sing" swelled, a defiant anthem weaving through the Georgia dusk, carrying the weight of centuries. The prosecution's fortress had crumbled. Jamal's phone video and the restored body cam footage had exposed Officer Mark Evans's assault, his words venomous. "People like you don't belong here." Angela's past as a Marine raider and Jamal's testimony, "She taught me to stand up," had swayed the jury, their eyes now holding respect, not doubt. Richard Avery, the prosecutor, sat slumped, his tailored suit wilted, his face pale as his case unraveled. Mark, at the plaintiff's table, stared at the floor, his uniform a hollow shell, his allies silent. Judge Henry Grayson cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the tension. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreperson, a middle-aged black woman with a steely gaze, stood. "We have, Your Honor."
She paused, her eyes meeting Angela's. "We find the defendant, Angela Carter, not guilty of assaulting an officer." The courtroom erupted. Activists cheered, signs waving like flames. Reporters typed frantically, their stories already blazing across X. David exhaled, his shoulders sagging with relief, but Angela remained still, her face calm, her fire tempered but unyielding. Mark's head dropped, his hands trembling, while Avery's jaw tightened, his eyes darting to Chief Harold Tate in the back, who glared with barely concealed fury. Grayson's gavel slammed, demanding order. "Miss Carter, you're free to go," he said, his tone softer, a flicker of respect in his weary eyes. "But this court warns all parties. Justice doesn't end here." His gaze lingered on Mark, a silent admonition. Angela stood, her posture unbroken, her dog tags cool against her skin. She met Jamal's eyes in the gallery, the boy's face alight with pride, his mother's arm around him. Grace, seated nearby, clutched her sign, "Truth is a fire." She'd raised Angela on stories of Harriet Tubman, of ancestors who carried freedom's flame through darkness. Today, that flame had burned through a town's lies. But the victory was fragile. As Angela and David stepped into the courthouse hallway, Chief Tate loomed, his badge gleaming, his voice low and cold. "This isn't over, Carter. You and that kid better watch your backs." His words were a spark in dry grass, a threat from a system that refuses to yield. David bristled, but Angela's hand on his arm stopped him. "Let them hiss," she whispered, echoing Grace's words. "Fire doesn't fear smoke." Outside, the crowd roared, their song now a victory chant. "Lift every voice and sing" filled the air. Grace at the forefront, her voice strong despite her years. News vans lined the street, cameras rolling as reporters shouted questions. Angela paused on the courthouse steps, the Georgia sunset casting an orange glow, as if her fire had painted the sky. She raised a hand, silencing the chaos, and spoke, her voice clear and unshakable. "I fought for truth, not just for me, but for Jamal, for my community, for every voice they tried to silence," she said. "The fire of our ancestors burns in us all, and it's only getting brighter." The crowd cheered, their signs waving, their phones capturing every word. On X, hashtag Truth is a Fire and hashtag Fire of Truth trended nationwide. Clips of Angela's speech and Jamal's testimony shared millions of times. An organizer tweeted, "Angela Carter didn't just win, she set Willow Creek ablaze with justice." But the shadows lingered. That night, at the Freedom's Flame Community Center, Angela found a brick through the window, a note tied to it, "Leave or burn." David cursed, his fists clenched, but Angela's face stayed calm. She'd faced worse, bullets in war, lies in court. She thought of Yemen, where she'd led her team through chaos, and of Grace, who'd marched in the 60s, undaunted by hate. This was just another fight. Jamal arrived, his hoodie pulled tight, his eyes fierce despite the fear. "They're mad, Miss Angela, but I ain't backing down," he said. She smiled, her hand on his shoulder. "You're fire, Jamal. They can't touch that." Grace joined them, her presence a steady flame, her words echoing, "The fire of our ancestors always lights the way." The community rallied, cleaning the shattered glass, painting over the graffiti that had marred the center. They stood together, their voices rising in song, a testament to resilience. Angela looked out at them, kids like Jamal, elders like Grace, neighbors who'd once doubted but now believed. Her fire had spread, and no threat could snuff it out. On X, the movement grew. Posts flooded in, from Willow Creek to cities across the nation, calling for accountability, for reform. A pastor tweeted, "Angela Carter's flame is ours now. The truth burns, and it's waking the world." The digital fire was a beacon, uniting voices in a chorus for justice.
Angela stood in the center's doorway, the night air cool, her dog tags heavy with memory.
The Georgia sun rose over Willow Creek, casting a warm glow on the Freedom's Flame Community Center, its freshly painted walls a testament to resilience. Angela Carter stood in the doorway, her navy blazer traded for a simple t-shirt, her eyes a steady fire that burned brighter than ever. The town was changed, scarred but awake, its shadows pierced by the truth she'd fought for. The air carried a faint echo of "Lift Every Voice and Sing," sung days ago by a crowd that refused to be silenced, a melody now woven into the town's soul. Angela's trial had ended with a not guilty verdict, a blaze that had torched Officer Mark Evans's lies. The body cam footage and Jamal's video, coupled with her Marine Raider past, had shattered the prosecution's case, exposing a system that shielded bullies with badges. Mark faced suspension, his career in tatters, while Chief Harold Tate's threats lingered like smoke, a reminder that the system wouldn't surrender easily. But Angela's fire had spread, from the courthouse to the streets, from Willow Creek to the nation. The center buzzed with life. Kids like Jamal filled the classrooms, learning about Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, and their own unbreakable spirit. Volunteers repaired the shattered window, the brick and its hateful note, "Leave or burn," now a relic, framed on the wall as a badge of defiance. Grace, Angela's mother, moved through the crowd, her gray hair tied back, her voice strong as she taught a group about the 60s marches. "The fire of our ancestors never dies," she said, her words echoing Angela's fight. David Reed arrived, his suit swapped for jeans, his scar softened by a rare smile. "You've got mail," he said, handing Angela a stack of letters. They poured in from across the country, support from activists, praise from veterans, drawings from kids inspired by her courage. One letter, from a retired Marine, read, "You carried the Raider flame into that courtroom, sister. Keep burning." Angela's throat tightened, her dog tags heavy with memory, but her resolve was steel. Jamal approached, his hoodie loose, his eyes brighter than the fear that had once shadowed them. "Miss Angela, they're talking about you at school," he said, a grin breaking through. "They're calling you the Fire Lady." He held up his phone, showing a viral X post with #FireOfTruth, a mural of Angela painted on an Atlanta wall, her silhouette wreathed in flames. The hashtag had become a movement, fueling calls for police reform, for accountability, for justice. Angela smiled, ruffling his hair. "You lit that spark, Jamal. Don't forget it." He nodded, his chest puffing with pride. The fire she'd kindled in him now a steady blaze. She'd taught him to survive, to stand, and now he was teaching others. His video a catalyst that had changed a town. But the scars remained. At night, Angela patrolled the center's perimeter, her Marine instincts sharp, aware of Tate's lingering influence. Anonymous calls still came, whispers of, "You'll pay." The graffiti returned, fainter but persistent, a reminder that hate didn't vanish with a verdict. Yet the community stood stronger. Neighbors who'd once crossed the street now joined her classes, their eyes open to the town's buried truths. The center's enrollment doubled, its walls lined with photos of Tubman, Malcolm X, and now Angela. Her trial a new chapter in their story. Grace pulled Angela aside, her hands warm, her eyes fierce with love. "You've done what I dreamed, child," she said. "You carried their fire, Harriet's, mine, yours." She gestured to the center, alive with voices. "This is what they fought for." Angela hugged her, the weight of generations in their embrace, the flame of their ancestors burning in their blood. That evening, Angela spoke at a town hall, the room packed with faces, black, white, young, old, united by her fight. "Willow Creek isn't perfect," she said, her voice clear, resonating like a drum. "But we've seen what truth can do. It's a fire that lights the way, that burns away lies, that builds something new." She paused, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "We carry that fire together, and no one can put it out." The room erupted in applause, hands raised, voices chanting, "Truth, truth."
On X, #TruthIsAFire trended again, clips of her speech shared by millions. A national news anchor tweeted, "Angela Carter's fire is remaking Willow Creek and America." The movement grew, with protests in cities, petitions for reform, and a spotlight on small towns like Willow Creek, where justice had too long been a shadow. Back at the center, Angela stood under the stars, the Georgia night cool, her dog tags glinting. She thought of Yemen, of missions where every step was a risk, and of Willow Creek, where every word had been a battle. The threats hadn't stopped, and Tate's allies watched, waiting for her to falter. But she'd faced worse: war, lies, hate, and emerged unbroken. Jamal joined her, his phone glowing with a new post, a photo of the center, captioned, "The Fire Lady's Home, #Fire of Truth." Angela laughed, the sound carrying over the quiet town. "Keep that flame burning, kid," she said. He nodded, his eyes a mirror of hers, a fire that would carry on. The Freedom's Flame Center stood as a beacon, its light piercing Willow Creek's darkness. Angela's truth had forged a new path, her fire spreading through Jamal, Grace, and a community reborn. The fight wasn't over. Hate lingered, and the system loomed. But her flame, rooted in ancestors and fueled by truth, was eternal, a blaze that would light the way for generations.